All right, so you handed us these excerpts from Por un pedazo de tierra,
Uh,
and I gotta say, just the title alone has me intrigued. Um, Geopolitics.
yeah,
Not exactly a light read, but the stuff you pulled out.
right.
Super interesting stuff. So get ready, because today's deep dive is all about kind of understanding the forces that shape our world. And trust me, way more relatable than you might think. We're talking about the connection between like your smartphone and US dominance.
Yeah, what's so interesting is that this book takes something as complex as geopolitics and kind of boils it down to this really simple idea, the connector cycle.
Okay, connector cycle, hit me with it.
So it's basically about how quickly and efficiently a group can make connections. Like we're talking trading ideas, goods, tech, and how that directly translates to their power. So faster cycle equals more power. And the book uses this really interesting example, the iPhone. Like if we think back to the early 2000s, why did the US, specifically Silicon Valley, why'd they end up dominating the smartphone market?
Yeah, now that you mention it, why did they?
Yeah, and it wasn't just about having like these brilliant engineers, although they had plenty of those. Silicon Valley had this incredibly fast connector cycle humming. They had a culture that encouraged risk-taking. There was a ton of investment pouring into research, and importantly, a global language in English that just made collaboration and trade so much smoother.
So it's like all the pieces just fell into place. And English being the global language of business definitely gives the US a head start, I'd imagine.
Oh, absolutely. And it's not just phones. This connector cycle advantage plays out across industries for the US on a global scale. It's powerful.
So we've got the US winning the smartphone game in the 21st century.
Right.
But this book doesn't just stop there.
No, it doesn't.
It takes us on this whirlwind tour through history, right? Talking about different eras defined by the most important resources at the time.
Yeah, it's this fascinating journey through time, showing how resources and technology have always been at the heart of geopolitics.
So where do we start?
We're talking like caveman days,
I
basically. The organic era. Food was king. Think hunter-gatherer societies. Whoever controlled the best hunting grounds or the best fishing spots had the power. But even back then, basic technology played a role.
Really? Like what?
Don't underestimate a good stone tool.
I mean, it had tools, but
It meant the difference between a successful hunt and going hungry.
that's true.
The groups with the best tools had a definite edge, even back then. But then things really ramp up with the solid era. Metalworking changes everything. Warfare, trade.
Right, this is where metal comes into play. Stronger weapons, more durable tools.
Exactly. And here's this really cool detail from the book. Coins. They
Mhm.
seem so simple, but the development of coins as a standardized form of currency was huge. Allowed for trade across vast distances, and it allowed for the rise of empires. Think about the Spanish Empire. Their dominance was fueled by silver from the Americas.
Wow. It's amazing how something as small as a coin could have such a massive impact on the balance of global power. It really makes you wonder what the defining resources of our era are.
I think we're in the energy era. Fossil fuels, electricity, they're the lifeblood of our modern world. Almost everything we do, from charging our phones to driving our cars, requires energy. So it's no wonder that this is a central battleground in geopolitics today.
Okay, so we've got this connector cycle driving progress. We've got resources shaping power throughout history.
Right.
But where does geography actually fit into all of this?
This is where the book gets really fun. It uses all these metaphors. Like imagine geopolitics as this giant game board. The different regions of the world are the players, and the book categorizes them as nuclei, voids, and friction points.
Okay, I'm visualizing risk right now. So the nuclei, those are like the major players, right? The ones calling the shot.
Precisely. Think densely populated, economically powerful regions. The US, Europe, East Asia, they're the powerhouses on the geopolitical chessboard.
And the voids are like the opposite.
Exactly. The voids are the geographical barriers. Vast deserts, dense jungles, harsh climates. They make it difficult to build connections, which impacts everything from trade to cultural exchange. The book even points out that the Sahara Desert has historically been a more significant dividing line between North Africa and sub-Saharan Africa than just the geographical distance alone.
Wow. So it's like these natural barriers actually shaped the flow of history.
Totally.
That's fascinating. So what about those friction points you mentioned?
So friction points, you guessed it. They're those smaller areas that are stuck between the big players, often become battlegrounds or strategically important prizes. Think of the Middle East or Central America. These are the regions where geopolitical tensions tend to flare up.
And I bet you've got some opinions on those.
Oh, yeah,
We'll save those for later.
definitely.
But seriously, it's fascinating to see how geography isn't just about maps and borders,
Right.
but that it plays this huge role in shaping global power
Yeah,
dynamics. But what about cities? They're not just concrete jungles. They gotta play a role in all of this, right?
totally. The book calls cities connectors, and for good reason. They're hubs of trade, ideas, and culture. And they significantly impact the connector cycle.
Okay, so give me an example. What makes a city a connector?
Think about a city like Antwerp, Belgium. It's a major hub for diamond trading, attracting experts and resources from around the globe. This concentration of expertise and resources makes cities like Antwerp vital nodes in the global network.
So a city built on sparkle.
Right,
It's a great example of how cities can concentrate resources and expertise in a specific area, influencing global markets.
for sure.
Yeah.
And it's not just about economics. The book makes this fascinating point about the psychological importance of cities.
Oh, tell me more.
So cities become symbols. Think Paris and romance, or Tokyo and cutting-edge technology. These perceptions, whether they're entirely accurate or not, shape how we view those places and the people who live there.
So it's like cities take on a life of their own, influencing how we see entire cultures. We often talk about countries as these like monolithic entities, but cities add another layer of complexity to the picture. And this is already making me rethink how I view the world.
I know, right?
So we've got connection, we've got resources, we've got geography, we've got even the psychology of cities all playing a part in this global power game. But where do we fit into all of this?
Well, that's where things get really interesting. The book dives into some deep questions about human nature and how our biology, even our evolutionary history, still influences geopolitics today.
Okay, now this is what I'm talking about. Let's dive in.
Because like the book is saying, hey, you think you're so advanced with your smartphones and global networks, but really deep down, we're still wired with those same instincts that drove our ancestors. Fascinating stuff.
Okay, so how does the book break down this whole human element thing?
So it uses these two really insightful lenses, the group lens and the leadership lens. Let's start with the groups. The book argues that our innate need to belong to a tribe, a nation, a religion, you name it, colors how we see the world and our place in it. It even draws this chilling parallel to chimpanzee communities.
Chimpanzees. Hold up. You're saying our global power struggles are like chimp turf wars.
Hear me out. So the book describes how chimps form these fiercely territorial groups, and they'll go to great lengths to protect their resources and territory. Sound familiar? It's a simplified example, sure, but it highlights this primal instinct we humans have, this us versus them. It's wired into us.
Wow, I've never thought about it like that, but it makes a lot of sense. Whether we like it or not, we're hardwired to identify with groups, and let's be honest, sometimes that leads to conflicts. So where does the leadership lens come in?
So the leadership lens zooms in on the individuals and institutions in power, the elite, if you will. The book argues that these figures and the systems they operate within really influence how a group's desires, whether for good or for ill, play out on the world stage. And it's not always pretty.
History's full of leaders making decisions that benefit them and not necessarily their people. Power can be a dangerous drug.
Oh, absolutely. But here's where it gets nuanced. The book suggests that the structure of power within a group can actually impact its tolerance for diversity. Like it gives examples of empires from the past. Some, even though they were built on conquest, were surprisingly tolerant of different cultures and religions because their power wasn't concentrated in the hands of one dominant cultural group.
That's fascinating. It challenges our assumptions about how power structures operate. You'd think a more diverse group would be more prone to infighting, but maybe that internal tension actually makes them more adaptable and open to different perspectives on the world stage.
That's exactly what the book is suggesting. It really makes you think about how much our assumptions about countries and cultures are shaped by the actions of those in charge.
This whole leadership lens has me thinking about all those strongman leaders we see popping up around the world.
Yeah.
Makes you wonder if they're truly acting on behalf of their people, or are they just driven by their own ambitions?
Yeah, it's a crucial question.
Hmm.
And it's one the book encourages us to ask. It argues that understanding these leadership dynamics, both the good and the bad, is essential for navigating the complexities of geopolitics in the 21st century.
It's like we need to be anthropologists as much as political analysts these days.
Totally.
It's not enough to look at the surface level. We need to understand the deeper cultural and psychological forces at play.
Precisely. And the book doesn't just leave us with these big abstract ideas. It connects them to tangible things that are happening in the world right now.
Okay, bring it back down to earth for me. Give me an example.
Let's talk about energy. Remember how we discussed the energy era? The book takes this deep dive into how the need for energy, especially in our modern world, is driving a whole new set of geopolitical power plays.
Right, it's not just about oil anymore. Everyone's talking about solar, wind, these new technologies.
Exactly. Those new technologies rely on different resources, each with its own geopolitical significance. The book uses this fascinating example, perovskite.
Perovskite. Okay, that sounds like something straight out of Star Trek. Break it down for me. What is it, and why should I care?
So it's a mineral, and it has the potential to revolutionize solar energy. Perovskite-based solar panels could be cheaper, more efficient, and easier to produce than traditional silicon-based panels. But here's the catch. Just like with oil, the supply of perovskite is concentrated in certain regions of the world.
So even if we crack the code on climate change and transition to renewable energy, the same geopolitical games will still be playing out just with different players and different resources. It's like a never-ending game of Risk, but with real-world stakes.
Exactly. And control over the production, distribution, and technological development related to these new energy resources is going to be a major source of geopolitical power in the coming decades. It's not just about who has the most oil anymore.
It's like we're constantly adapting, looking for the next thing that will give us an edge. It makes you wonder what the geopolitical battlefields of the future will look like.
Yeah, the book delves into that as well. Remember how we talked about cities as connectors?
Mm.
Well, the book argues that control over trade routes, both physical and digital, is going to be more important than ever in this new interconnected world.
So we're talking about the traditional shipping lanes, but also things like the internet.
Exactly. Think about the Strait of Hormuz. It's this narrow waterway in the Middle East, and a significant portion of the world's oil flows through it. Control over that choke point has huge geopolitical implications.
It's like a game of capture the flag, but with oil tankers instead of flags.
Yeah.
Whoever controls that strait has a lot of leverage.
And those choke points exist in the digital world too. The book points out that a huge amount of global internet traffic flows through a relatively small number of undersea cables.
Wait, seriously, the information that powers our digital lives is physically traveling through cables on the ocean floor. That's insane.
It is. And just like with traditional trade routes, those cables can be vulnerable. Damage or disruption to those cables could have huge economic and strategic consequences.
It's like we're building this incredibly interconnected world, but we're also creating new vulnerabilities in the process. It's a double-edged sword.
That's a great way to put it. And the book argues that understanding these vulnerabilities, both physical and digital, is essential for navigating the future of geopolitics.
So we've talked about resources, technology, geography, even our own evolutionary history. It's a lot to wrap your head around. But one thing that keeps coming back to me is this idea of cities as connectors. They're clearly more than just places where people live and work. What makes them so crucial in this global power game?
Think of cities as nodes in this vast interconnected network. They're not just places where things happen, they're catalysts for the connector cycle. Cities concentrate resources, expertise, information. They create these hotspots of innovation and economic activity that ripple outwards, impacting the entire world.
Give me an example. What makes a city a true connector?
Take London, for example. It's a global financial center, right? But its influence extends far beyond its physical borders. Decisions made in London's financial markets impact businesses and economies around the world. It's a hub of global finance.
So their influence is amplified by their role as a connector in the global network. It's not just about what happens within their city limits, it's about their connections to the rest of the world.
Exactly. And this influence isn't just economic. Cities also play this huge role in shaping our perceptions of culture and identity. Think about a city like Tokyo. What comes to mind? Cutting-edge technology, sleek design, a vibrant pop culture scene. These images, whether they're accurate or not, become shorthand for an entire nation's identity.
It's like cities are these cultural ambassadors, for better or for worse. They project an image of their nation to the world.
Yeah, and those perceptions, those images, have real-world consequences. They influence tourism, foreign investment, even diplomatic relations. Cities, with their unique ability to connect people, ideas, and resources, play this crucial role in shaping the geopolitical landscape.
So it's not just about controlling resources or trade routes, it's also about controlling the narrative,
Right.
shaping how others see you on the global stage.
Totally.
And cities are at the forefront of that battle for hearts and minds.
Exactly. The book argues that understanding the cultural and psychological power of cities is essential for navigating the complexities of geopolitics. It's not enough to just look at maps and statistics. We need to understand how people perceive the world. And cities play this huge role in shaping those perceptions.
It's almost like a city itself can be a resource that projects soft power globally. This whole discussion is making me think about the world in a completely different way. It's fascinating, but also a little overwhelming. All these interconnected forces, the constant struggle for power and influence, makes you wonder, is conflict inevitable? Is it just human nature to constantly be vying for an advantage?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? And the book doesn't shy away from the darker aspects of human nature. It acknowledges our capacity for conflict, our tribal instincts, our desire for dominance. But it also suggests that understanding these drives might be the key to finding new ways to cooperate.
So it's not all doom and gloom. There's hope for us yet.
The book points to examples throughout history where cooperation, even if it was driven by self-interest, has shaped the geopolitical landscape in positive ways.
Okay, I'm listening. Give me some hope here.
Think about the ancient Silk Road. It was this network of trade routes that connected East and West for centuries. Different cultures and civilizations, often with conflicting ideologies, managed to coexist and even thrive because they recognized the mutual benefits of trade and exchange.
So even when there's a risk of clashing, there's also an incentive to cooperate. It's like this constant push and pull between our primal instincts and our desire for progress.
That's a great way to put it. And the book argues that understanding these competing forces is crucial to navigating the complexities of geopolitics.
So what's the takeaway? Are we doomed to repeat the mistakes of the past, or can we evolve beyond these cycles of conflict? This book has presented a pretty compelling case for the power of understanding history and human behavior. But how do we actually apply that knowledge to build a better future? How do we harness these powerful forces for good?
Well, the book doesn't offer any easy answers, but it does provide a framework for thinking about these complex issues.
And that framework is,
Well, it all goes back to those two lenses we talked about, the group lens and the leadership lens. The book argues that understanding those is key. If we can grasp how our need to belong and the actions of those in power shape the world, we can make more informed choices, both individually and as a global community.
okay, so it's about being more aware of our own biases, of the motivations of our leaders, of the historical forces that shape the present. But how do we actually put that awareness into practice? It feels like a tall order.
It is, but the book offers a glimmer of hope. It argues that while our biology might predispose us to conflict, our capacity for reason and collaboration gives us the power to build a more cooperative and interconnected world. It won't be easy, but it is possible.
That's a hopeful thought. But realistically, how do we even begin to manage these powerful forces, especially when they're often rooted in our primal instincts?
It starts with education and understanding. The more we learn about history, about different cultures, about the forces that shape our world, the better equipped we are to make informed decisions and challenge our own biases.
So knowledge is power. It's like that old saying, those who cannot remember the past are condemned to repeat it.
Exactly. And it's not just about individual knowledge either. It's about fostering greater understanding and empathy between different groups. The book suggests that one of the best antidotes to this us versus them mentality is increased interaction and exchange. When we break down those barriers and engage with different perspectives, we start to see the world in a new light.
It's like that moment when you travel to a new place and you realize that people everywhere share the same basic desires to live in peace, to provide for their families, to build a better future. It's easy to forget that when we're bombarded with news stories about conflict and division.
And that's why this book is so important. It reminds us that even in a world of complex geopolitical forces, it's still human beings making the decisions. And human beings are capable of great things when we work together.
This deep dive has been quite the journey. We've covered so much ground, from the resources that shape our history to the psychology that drives our behavior. It's a lot to process. But if there's one big takeaway I'm walking away with, it's that understanding the human element of geopolitics is more important now than ever before.
Couldn't agree more. It's not enough to look at maps and statistics. We need to understand the hopes, the fears, and the aspirations of the people living in this interconnected world.
It's like that famous quote, "The map is not the territory." We can analyze data and we can study trends all day long, but we can't forget that real people with real lives are at the heart of these geopolitical forces.
And understanding those people, their stories and their motivations is essential to building a more peaceful and prosperous future for everyone.
Well said. I think we've given our listeners a lot to ponder today.
Yeah, I have a feeling they're going to be looking at their smartphones a little differently after this. those trade routes in their pockets.
Absolutely. So until next time, keep exploring, keep asking questions, and keep diving deep into the forces that shape our world.